For years, the Bee Gees stood as an untouchable force, an unstoppable trio whose harmonies felt as though they came from another realm. They didn't just perform, they ascended. Their songs ignited dance floors, dominated charts, and etched their legacy into the history of pop music. Yet behind those iconic melodies was something much more delicate, a brotherhood born out of hardship, tested by fame, and sealed by hidden truths. Now, Barry Gibb, the last surviving Bee Gee, has chosen to speak out and share the real story of his brothers. What he shares isn't warm with nostalgia, nor is it meant to comfort. It's sharp, painful. This isn't merely a tale of music. It's a story of what happens when the world crowns you royalty, and the crown becomes too heavy. Before the limelight, before the platinum records, before it all unraveled, there were 3 boys, 1 dream, and a bond believed to be unbreakable. Well before the fame and flashing cameras, the Gibb brothers were fighters. Their path didn't begin in luxury but in struggle, guided by perseverance, love, and an unwavering faith in the magic of music. Barry and the twins, Maurice and Robin, were born into a world still healing from World War II. Their father, Hugh Gibb, a talented but underemployed bandleader, had few opportunities in post-war Manchester. He devoted all his musical passion to his sons, not just teaching them how to sing or play instruments, but showing them how music could be a refuge, a survival tool. Their mother, Barbara, was the heart of the household, nurturing her son's creativity while managing the daily realities of poverty. Hoping for a better future, the Gibb family made a bold move in the late 1950s, leaving England to settle in Australia. The journey to Redcliffe, near Brisbane, was not fueled by dreams of wealth but by necessity. They arrived with virtually nothing, no job security, no financial cushion. One harsh winter, without heating, they had to keep warm by wrapping themselves in newspaper, clinging to each other against the cold. Their dreams were the only thing keeping despair at bay. Even in those dark times, music was their constant source of hope. The Gibb brothers discovered a unique harmony that felt almost otherworldly. They sang anywhere they could, on sidewalks, in parks, and especially at the noisy Brisbane Speedway. Amid revving engines and clouds of beer-soaked air, they performed for crowds of gamblers, drinkers, and thrill-seekers, often earning barely enough for bread or canned food. Their earliest songs, scrawled into worn school notebooks, carried themes far beyond their years: loneliness, fragile hope, and dreams forever just out of reach. A turning point came when a local radio DJ named Bill Gates, not the tech billionaire, recognized their raw, emotional sound. He helped introduce them to a wider audience and inspired their name, Bee Gees. It wasn't just shorthand for Brothers Gibb, it honored the men who supported them from the start: Bill Gates, promoter Bill Good, and their father Hugh. Encouraged by this early support, the brothers made a risky decision in 1967 to return to England in pursuit of stardom. With only their harmonies and a suitcase of demo tapes, they arrived in London broke and anonymous. Yet the timing couldn't have been better. British music was entering a new era, eager for fresh talent and authentic voices. Their first international hit, New York Mining Disaster 1941, introduced a new sound to the world, 3 voices singing as if they shared a single soul. But even then, Barry could never have predicted what lay ahead. The unbreakable bond they once shared eventually began to unravel in private. Now, Barry is opening up about the painful truths that fame, family, and time had long tried to hide, truths that started to emerge just as their powerful sound was captivating the world. But their meteoric rise came at a cost. At the height of their success, with the release of the Saturday Night Fever soundtrack, the Gibb brothers reached a level of fame that few artists ever achieve. The album became a global sensation, selling over 40 million copies and becoming an emblem of the era. Iconic tracks like Staying Alive, Night Fever, and How Deep Is Your Love echoed through nightclubs and left a lasting impact on a generation. These songs still resonate today, having garnered more than 2 billion views on YouTube nearly half a century later. For a brief moment, the brothers from the Isle of Man were untouchable, having taken the world by storm. But behind all the glitter and acclaim, cracks in their foundation had begun to show. As is often the case, fame came with a steep price. The Bee Gees were pushed into a relentless spotlight, and the pressure to stay on top started to strain their bond as brothers. Maurice, who had once been the group's cheerful glue, turned to alcohol. Drinking helped numb the tension, but over time, it took a toll on both his health and his relationships. Robin, the most inward-looking of the three, began to withdraw. The glare of fame became overwhelming, and he sank into paranoia and anxiety, feeling increasingly overlooked and unheard. Barry, the oldest and the group's unofficial leader, carried the burden of keeping everything together. With his charismatic demeanor and signature falsetto, he became the face and voice of the Bee Gees. Outwardly, he seemed in control, but behind the scenes, he was unraveling. The weight of managing the band's creative direction and public image grew too heavy. He found himself trapped in a cycle of chasing perfection, always focused on the next hit, the next tour, the next reinvention. Their incredible success brought great wealth, and with it, a life of luxury. They purchased grand homes in Miami, quiet mansions in England, and maintained a retreat back in the Isle of Man. But their fortune also attracted opportunists. Managers, producers, and hangers-on began to circle the band, whispering in ears, creating rifts, and manipulating allegiances. The once close family band slowly transformed into a fractured business entity under increasing corporate pressure. Creative differences became personal. Barry, now confident in his central role, began to demand lead vocals on most songs, believing his voice defined their sound. Robin, feeling pushed aside, started working secretly on solo projects, trying to reclaim his identity and voice, both figuratively and literally. Maurice, stuck in the middle, withdrew further into alcohol, struggling to juggle his role as peacemaker with his growing inner struggles. Beneath their united front in interviews and stage performances, resentment built silently. Trust was fading. Eventually, the strain became impossible to hide. Arguments that had once stayed behind closed doors erupted into public confrontations. Recording sessions became tense and hostile. Decisions were made in silos. The sacred bond between them began to collapse under the pressure of fame, ego, and exhaustion. Now, in a surprising and emotional interview, Barry admits that behind the glittering image lay truths they couldn't face at the time, truths he can no longer keep buried. The eventual breakup of the band came as a global shock. By 1969, the small cracks had turned into a massive divide. The final blow came during the making of Odessa, when creative conflicts crossed a personal line. Robin felt his contributions were being ignored and that Barry's growing dominance was drowning out his voice. Then came the breaking point. Robin left the band in a storm of conflict. His departure was loud, public, and full of anger. He accused Barry of being domineering and controlling, and called Maurice passive, unwilling to stand up. Barry responded in interviews with criticisms of his own, describing Robin as once close and united. The Bee Gees were now torn apart, with personal conflict making headlines. Robin, feeling stifled and driven by ego, broke away from the group to forge his own path. He released Saved by the Bell, a haunting orchestral ballad that became a global hit. It was both a personal victory and a clear message: he didn't need the Bee Gees to succeed. In response, Barry and Maurice continued using the Bee Gees name and released Cucumber Castle, an album that leaned into theatrical soft rock. They even created a surreal TV special to accompany it. But without Robin, the chemistry faltered. Critics gave mixed reviews, and fans were split. The rift deepened. For more than a year, the brothers didn't speak. Their interviews turned hostile. Robin lashed out, accusing the Bee Gees of being a dictatorship under Barry. Barry, in turn, called Robin's departure a betrayal of both the band and their family. Behind the scenes, the impact was even more painful. Maurice, caught between his feuding brothers, began to spiral. He turned increasingly to alcohol, often drinking until he blacked out. His joyful spirit faded, replaced by erratic moods and growing depression. Their mother, Barbara Gibb, was devastated as she watched her sons fall apart. She made heartfelt appeals, through letters, phone calls, and emotional visits, begging them to reconcile. But pride kept them distant. Things reached a breaking point in early 1970 when Barry collapsed from exhaustion during a recording session. The stress of the split and constant pressure had worn him down. His health scare, along with their mother's persistent encouragement, finally pushed the brothers to meet in private. The reunion was difficult and emotional. Seeing Barry so weakened and recognizing the damage they'd done to each other helped soften their defenses. Slowly and cautiously, they decided to come back together. By August 1970, the Bee Gees were officially reunited. They returned to the studio and, in 1971, released 2 Years On, featuring the heartfelt song Lonely Days. Fans welcomed them back, and the music industry breathed a sigh of relief. But inside the group, emotional wounds still lingered. Though the reunion was genuine, old grievances hadn't entirely faded. Trust was shaky, and bitterness remained just beneath the surface. Even as they would later soar during the disco era, the events of 1969 left cracks in their foundation, fault lines that would resurface over time. As the 1980s began, the Bee Gees, once the icons of disco, faced a harsh cultural shift. The genre that made them global stars became a target of ridicule. Radio stations began staging disco demolition events, and the Bee Gees' falsetto-laced hits became symbols of a fading trend. Suddenly, their music disappeared from the airwaves. Forced out of the spotlight, the brothers didn't vanish, they adapted. They quietly evolved into influential behind-the-scenes creators. Barry leaned into his falsetto and became a highly sought-after collaborator. In 1983, he gave Islands in the Stream to Kenny Rogers and Dolly Parton, a song initially written for Marvin Gaye. It became a massive hit, proving the Bee Gees' musical magic still had power, even without their names in lights. Maurice and Robin turned their focus to writing and producing for other artists. They helped craft hits for Barbra Streisand, Diana Ross, and Dionne Warwick. Their songwriting retained its emotional resonance and pop appeal. But as their professional lives quietly flourished, a shadow loomed. Their youngest brother, Andy Gibb, once seemed destined to surpass them. With his good looks, charisma, and smooth vocals, Andy quickly rose to fame in the late 1970s with hits like Shadow Dancing and I Just Want to Be Your Everything, both penned by his older brothers. But Andy struggled deeply with fame only intensified a deep-rooted insecurity. Andy Gibb began using cocaine, at first to cope, then out of dependency. As his addiction worsened, his career crumbled. His brothers did everything they could to help, they staged interventions, paid for repeated rehab stays, and spent countless hours pleading with Andy to get clean. Occasionally, there were hopeful signs, periods of sobriety that hinted at recovery, but the addiction never truly loosened its grip. On March 10, 1988, just 5 days after turning 30, Andy passed away. The official cause was myocarditis, a heart condition likely worsened by years of substance abuse. Unofficially, the family understood he had been emotionally broken long before his heart stopped. His death was devastating. Robin, who shared a deeply personal bond with Andy, was overwhelmed with guilt, blaming himself for not doing more or noticing the signs earlier. Maurice, already haunted by his own issues, sank further into alcohol and drug use. Barry, the family's steady anchor, turned to music for solace and distraction. Behind closed doors, he grieved profoundly, often breaking down during studio sessions. In 1991, Maurice reached his lowest point. After waking up in a jail cell following a blackout, he checked into rehab. That moment marked a turning point, perhaps even saving his life, though the emotional wounds never truly healed. Robin, meanwhile, battled numerous health problems, including issues with his digestive and immune systems. He kept most of it hidden from the public, maintaining an image of strength even as his health deteriorated. Though the Bee Gees continued making music into the 1990s and early 2000s, a persistent sense of tragedy hung over them. Fame had given them success, wealth, and a worldwide following, but not peace. As time passed, Barry bore the pain of those losses in silence. Only recently has he begun to open up about the truth, stories buried beneath fame and their iconic music. The years that followed were marked by sorrow and farewells. The 2000s became a slow farewell for the Gibb brothers. It began in January 2003, when Maurice, the group's lively and spirited center, died unexpectedly from a twisted intestine. One moment he was making jokes with hospital staff, the next, he was gone. The shock was immense. Barry, always the dependable leader, was devastated. "It was like someone just unplugged me," he would later admit. The world lost a legend, Barry lost a soulmate. Robin, his soulful twin, was crushed. He sank into a grief few could understand or ease. Yet even in mourning, Robin kept moving, immersing himself in work and legacy, trying to avoid stillness. But life had other plans. After a long, private battle with cancer, Robin died in 2012. Unlike Maurice's sudden death, Robin's came gradually, but its emotional toll was just as deep, if not more so. Barry became the last surviving brother of the original four. The silence that followed was nearly unbearable. Each loss left a deeper void that neither music nor memory could fill. Barry would often return to Maurice's recording booth, sitting in the same chair his brother once used, listening to unreleased vocal tracks, voices captured in time. Sometimes he cried. Other times, he simply sat still, hoping to feel his brother's presence. Even decades later, Barry still visits Andy's grave, whispering to the wind. He confesses to speaking aloud, asking for forgiveness, though he's unsure exactly what for. Maybe for being the one who survived. Maybe for not recognizing the signs. Maybe for failing to save them. Maybe for everything. For years, Barry remained silent about their losses, carrying the pain privately. He spoke little of the grief, the heartache, or the bitterness that followed. Surviving sometimes meant carrying the weight of losing those you loved most. Over time, the silence became unbearable, suffocating. And then, for the first time in decades, Barry broke his silence, but it wasn't the relief he had hoped for. In a recent, revealing interview, Barry Gibb shared something far deeper than a look back at his musical career. Instead of reflecting on fame, he opened up about a lifetime of pain that had long been hidden beneath the glitz of harmonies, stage lights, and #1 hits. "I can finally reveal this," Barry said softly, almost to himself. What followed wasn't the confident leader the world knew, but a broken brother, a soul ravaged by grief and memory. One of the most touching moments in the interview came when Barry spoke of his younger brother Andy. His voice wavered as he recalled a night in Miami that would haunt him forever. Andy had called fear and panic in his voice. He was high, terrified, convinced someone was out to harm him. Barry rushed to Andy's house, only to find him curled up in a closet, sobbing, trembling, broken. "I just held him," Barry recalled. "He was our baby. And we let him die. I couldn't fix him. No one could." That moment exposed a wound that had never healed, a sorrow buried under years of silence. Barry's last conversation with Andy hadn't been easy. He had tried to intervene with tough love, hoping to pull him from his downward spiral, but instead, it had driven Andy further away. A few days later, Andy was gone. But the sorrow didn't end there. Maurice Gibb's sudden death in 2003 left Barry to grapple with an entirely different kind of loss. Maurice, the heart of the Bee Gees, was the peacekeeper, the one who could diffuse tension with humor or calm the storm with a laugh. When Mo passed, Barry felt his world crumble. "Mo was the glue," he said. "Without him, everything just fell apart." That loss became even heavier when Barry found something he had never shared before, a notebook among Maurice's belongings, filled with handwritten lyrics. But these weren't the usual Bee Gees love songs, they were dark, full of sorrow and loneliness. Barry had never told Maurice that he had read them, and now, it was too late. The silence surrounding that moment became another burden Barry carried. Robin's death in 2012 reopened every wound. Their relationship had always been complex, creative and intense, yet often combative. In recent years, they had drifted apart, clashing over the band's direction, their legacy, and control. Their final exchange had ended in anger, harsh words, and a slammed phone. Barry never called back, and then, Robin was gone. "That's my burden," Barry whispered. "I carry it every day. I never got to say I was sorry. I never got to say goodbye." He wondered why Robin had kept his cancer diagnosis a secret, why he hadn't shared it with him. It haunted him that, even in their final moments, they had been on bad terms. It was the same with Maurice. He explained that they weren't really speaking when Maurice suddenly passed in 2003 during an operation. "Jesus," Barry said with disbelief. "That's all my brothers." Perhaps the hardest truth Barry revealed was how the rivalries, egos, and jealousy had slowly poisoned the bond between them. As time went on, success became less about making music and more about competition. "Every hit song masked a war behind the scenes," Barry said. "Before we became famous," he continued, his voice heavy with nostalgia, "those were the best times of our lives. There was no competition. It didn't matter who sang what. We were just brothers making music together. But as fame and pressure built, everything changed. The constant drive for more success only fueled the toxic dynamics between them. We were jealous of each other," Barry admitted, his words cutting through the years of pain. "Sometimes, it got so bad, I hated my brothers. I hated what we were doing too." Creative differences turned into deep-seated grudges, and pride became a weapon. Instead of staying close, they kept score. By the time they recognized how much they had drifted apart, there was no opportunity to reconcile. Death arrived while the wounds were still raw. "I thought we'd have time," Barry said, his voice breaking. "I thought we'd fix it, but the anger lasted too long, and by then, it was too late." This is the part Barry Gibb never wanted to speak aloud. This is why the truth isn't easy to face. Behind every hit from the Bee Gees, there was bitterness, silence, and pain. Now, with the silence finally shattered, the damage is laid bare. It's painful, it's honest, and it's permanent. But by confronting these truths, Barry has taken the first step toward something he once thought impossible: healing. By revealing the pain, the regrets, and the fractured love, he no longer carries it on his own. The silence that once trapped him has been broken, and in its place, there might be a small possibility of peace, not just for Barry, but for the memory of the brothers he loved, fought with, lost, and still honors through his music. Legacy and longevity. Barry Gibb's final chapter. As the last surviving Bee Gee, Barry is the only one left to tell their story. Over the years, he has become more than just a music icon. He is a symbol of survival, love, and loss. Each time he performs, it's more than just a show. His voice, still strong and filled with emotion, carries the weight of memories. While the harmonies are gone, the echoes of Maurice, Robin, and Andy continue to follow him wherever he goes. Barry rarely speaks in depth about his brothers, and when he does, he keeps it brief, as if the memories are too fragile to touch. Even through the pain, he continues to preserve their legacy. His recent collaborations with artists like Dolly Parton and Brandi Carlile haven't been about making a comeback. They've been about honoring what the Bee Gees created together. Songs like Words and Run to Me have taken on new meaning, serving as tributes, a way to keep his brothers close. When Barry was knighted in 2017 for his contributions to music, he didn't make it about himself. He simply said, "For them." That moment, like so many others, wasn't about celebration, it was a vow to remember. Barry Gibb carries the past with him every day. He is the last voice of a group that forever changed music. And now, after all these years, he is finally speaking the truth about what it truly cost.